She healed a wild wolf's wounds. One night, it came back with an unbelievable gift. The winter wind roared through the trees, rattling the windows of an old wooden cabin perched at the edge of a frozen forest. Inside, Evelyn Carter sat alone in her rocking chair, wrapped in a thick woolen shawl. The fire in the stone fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. She sipped her tea, staring at the flames, lost in thought. Evelyn had lived in this cabin for nearly 15 years, but it no longer felt like home. Not since Daniel was gone. Her son had been everything to her. Her pride, her joy, her only family. A wildlife biologist just like her, Daniel had dedicated his life to protecting endangered animals. Then one day, he didn't come back. A rock slide in the mountains took him, leaving Evelyn with nothing but a folded flag from the rescue team and a lifetime of unanswered questions. Since then, her days had blended into one another, a silent routine of feeding the birds, gathering firewood, and keeping herself just busy enough to ignore the emptiness. She rarely ventured into town anymore. The pity in people's eyes was too much. Outside, the storm raged, the wind howling like a wounded animal. Evelyn turned her head, frowning. That sound, it wasn't just the wind. It was something else. A low, painful whimper. She sat up straight, holding her breath. The sound came again. Faint, but distinct. Evelyn hesitated. Could be a coyote, or a deer caught in a trap. She'd seen enough suffering in the wild to know that injured animals rarely survived long in these conditions. She should ignore it. Stay inside. Let nature take its course. But something about the sound, something desperate, made her grab her flashlight and coat. The storm was relentless. Snow lashed against her face as she stepped outside, her boots sinking into the thick, icy powder. She adjusted her hood and gripped the flashlight, sweeping its beam across the tree line. The whimper came again, leading her deeper into the dark forest. Branches cracked under her feet as she trudged forward. Her breath formed white clouds in the freezing air. The storm muffled every other sound, making the forest feel eerily silent, as if it were holding its breath. Then she saw it. Under a tangle of bare branches, half buried in the snow, lay a black wolf. Evelyn's heart pounded. She had encountered wolves before, cautious glimpses in the distance, their eyes glowing in the dark. But never like this, never so close. The wolf's body trembled violently, its dark fur dusted with snow. Blood stained the white ground beneath its hind leg, where a cruel metal trap clamped around its flesh. A wave of anger surged through her. Traps like these had been illegal in this area for years. Some hunters still use them, cruel and careless, leaving wounded animals to die slow, painful deaths. The wolf's golden eyes flickered open, locking onto hers. Evelyn froze. She expected a snarl, a flash of teeth, a final desperate attempt at defense. But the wolf didn't move. It simply watched her, panting heavily, its breath shallow and unsteady. Fear knotted in her stomach. This was a wild animal, strong, dangerous. Even in its weakened state, it could lash out. But she saw something in its eyes, pain, fear, and something else, acceptance. It didn't want to fight, it wanted help. Evelyn slowly crouched down, her mind racing. She needed to get that trap off, but how? She thought back to her years working in the field, helping injured animals, treating wounds in the wild. Her knowledge had faded with time, but instinct took over. First, calm it down. Her voice was steady, soft. I'm not here to hurt you. The wolf didn't move, only watched her. Gritting her teeth, Evelyn pulled off her gloves and reached for the trap. The metal was ice cold against her fingers. She winced as she tried to pry it open, but the rusted hinges wouldn't budge. She needed tools. I'll be back, she whispered, standing up. The wolf let out a weak, exhausted whine, as if begging her not to leave. I promise. She turned and ran, her heart hammering as she stumbled through the deep snow. The storm pushed against her, slowing her down, but she pressed on. The cabin was a glowing beacon in the darkness. She threw open the door, her hands fumbling for her old toolkit. A hammer, a wrench, a hacksaw, anything that could break that trap. She grabbed a thick blanket too. Minutes later, she was back in the forest. The wolf was still there, shivering, eyes half closed. Evelyn knelt beside it, spreading the blanket over its body. "Stay with me," she murmured, almost there. She worked as fast as she could. The rusted metal groaned as she pried at the trap, her fingers numb with cold. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jaws of the trap snapped open. The wolf whimpered as Evelyn carefully pulled its leg free. Blood oozed from the deep gash. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a flask of whiskey. "This is going to sting," she warned, pouring the liquid over the wound. The wolf let out a low, rumbling growl but didn't resist. Tearing a strip from the blanket, she wrapped it around the wound, securing it as best as she could. "There," she exhaled, sitting back on her heels. "That should help." The storm howled around them, but Evelyn barely felt the cold. She was too busy staring into the wolf's golden eyes. Something had shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. For the first time since Daniel's death, she had saved something instead of losing it. But she wasn't sure if she had saved the wolf, or if the wolf had saved her.
The night was long, the storm relentless. Evelyn sat beside the wolf in the barn, the lantern's dim glow flickering against the wooden walls. Outside, the wind roared, shaking the roof, but inside, the silence was thick with uncertainty. The wolf lay curled up in a nest of old blankets and hay, its chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. It hadn't moved much since she had freed it from the trap, exhaustion pinning it to the ground. Evelyn knew she had done all she could for now. The wound was bandaged, the wolf was sheltered, and yet she couldn't shake the unease in her chest. Had she made a mistake? This was a wild animal, after all, a predator. She wasn't sure if it would survive the night, or if by morning it would wake with renewed strength and see her as a threat. She pulled her coat tighter and let out a breath, watching it cloud in the cold air. "Guess we'll find out, won't we?" she murmured. The wolf didn't stir. With a final glance at her unexpected guest, Evelyn rose, her old bones protesting, and made her way back to the cabin. She barely slept that night. Every howl of the wind, every creak of the wood made her eyes snap open. She imagined the wolf limping out of the barn, disappearing into the night, or worse, attacking out of instinct. By the time the first light of dawn crept through her window, exhaustion weighed heavy on her. But there was something else too, a pull. A strange, undeniable urge to check on the wolf. The morning was bitterly cold, the storm's aftermath leaving the world covered in an untouched layer of glistening snow. Evelyn wrapped herself in her thickest coat and trudged to the barn, her breath coming in white puffs. The moment she cracked the door open, golden eyes met hers. The wolf was awake. It didn't move, but it was watching her, its gaze sharp and wary. Evelyn hesitated. This was the real test. Slowly, she stepped inside, careful not to make sudden movements. The wolf tensed, its ears flicking back, its muscles coiled as if ready to spring. "I see you're feeling a little better," she said softly. The wolf let out a low rumble, not quite a growl, but a warning. Evelyn paused. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, but she was cautious. Animals were unpredictable when in pain. She kept her movements slow, stepping closer but keeping a safe distance. The bandage around its leg was still in place, but she could see fresh blood staining the fabric. It needed cleaning. "You're not going to like this," she muttered. She reached for a metal bowl, filling it with warm water from the kettle she had brought. The moment she knelt, the wolf's body went rigid. Evelyn held up her hands. "I'm just trying to help." For a long moment they stared at each other. Then something unexpected happened. The wolf lowered its head, not in submission, but in acceptance. Evelyn swallowed, her heart pounding. Carefully, she reached for the bandage and unwrapped it, revealing the gash underneath. The flesh was raw, swollen, but not as bad as she had feared. She dipped a cloth into the warm water and began cleaning the wound. The wolf flinched, letting out a deep, guttural growl, but it didn't bite. It was trusting her. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "There we go," she murmured. "That's not so bad, is it?" The wolf huffed, closing its eyes as if exhausted by the interaction. A small smile tugged at her lips. Over the next few days, Evelyn cared for the wolf with cautious determination. She brought it food, mostly raw meat from her freezer. The first time she slid a plate toward it, the wolf barely lifted its head. By the second day, it sniffed the food but made no move to eat. By the third, hunger won. Evelyn watched as the wolf finally took a bite, chewing slowly, as if testing its strength. Relief flooded her. Each day she changed its bandages, cleaned its wound, and spoke to it in soft murmurs. She didn't know why. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was loneliness. "You remind me of someone," she admitted one evening, as she poured herself a cup of tea beside the barn door. The wolf's golden eyes flicked to her. "My son, he had your eyes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The wolf blinked. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt like someone was listening. The bond between them grew in small, almost imperceptible ways. The wolf no longer tensed when she entered the barn. It no longer growled when she reached for its injured leg. But it was still wild. One afternoon, Evelyn made a mistake. She had grown comfortable, a little too confident. She reached for the empty plate near the wolf's paws, forgetting for just a second that this was no house dog. The snarl came fast, deep, and vicious. Before she could react, the wolf lunged, not to bite, but to warn. Its teeth snapped inches from her hand. Evelyn jerked back, her heart slamming against her ribs. They locked eyes. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the wolf lowered its head, stepping back as if realizing what it had done. Evelyn's breath came fast, her hands shaking. She should have been terrified. She should have thrown open the barn door and let the wolf go. But instead, she nodded. "I get it," she said quietly. She had crossed a line. It had reminded her. Wild was still wild. By the end of the week, the wolf was stronger. It could stand on its own, though it still limped. Evelyn knew the time was coming. It would leave, and she should let it. But something inside her twisted at the thought. She had spent years thinking she was ready to be alone forever. Then a wounded creature had stumbled into her life, forcing her to care, forcing her to feel again. And now it would leave, or so she thought. One morning she opened the barn door expecting the wolf to be gone. But there it was, sitting, waiting, watching her. Not as prey, not as a threat, as something else. Evelyn swallowed hard, stepping forward. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. The wolf flicked its ears, then, slowly, deliberately, lowered itself onto the ground, resting its head on its paws. It wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. And to her surprise, neither was she. The snow had begun to melt. Winter loosened its grip on the land, and patches of brown earth peeked through the frost-covered fields. The trees, once weighed down by ice, now stood bare, their branches trembling in the cold wind. And yet the wolf remained. Evelyn had expected it to leave weeks ago. She had even prepared herself for it, telling herself that she wouldn't feel sad when she woke up one morning and found the barn empty. But every day, when she opened the door, golden eyes met hers. She had stopped calling it the wolf in her mind. It wasn't just some wild creature anymore. It was something else, something more. She hadn't named it. Naming it would mean admitting it was hers to name. But deep down, she already had one in mind, Shadow, because that's what it had become. A silent presence at her side. A ghost of something long lost. Shadow's leg had healed enough for him to move freely, though he still walked with a slight limp. He followed Evelyn at a distance, watching as she chopped firewood, as she checked her garden, as she sat on the porch with her evening tea. At first, he kept his distance, but little by little, the space between them shrank. One morning, as Evelyn set out a plate of food, Shadow didn't wait for her to leave before eating. He lowered his head, ears flicking back slightly, but he ate, right there, with her standing only a few feet away. It was the first time she had felt truly accepted. She smiled, shaking her head. "Guess we're both stubborn, huh?" Shadow didn't react, but something about the way he held her gaze made her think he understood. Weeks passed, and a strange kind of companionship settled between them. Evelyn talked to him, more than she had talked to anyone in years. She told him about Daniel, about the days they used to hike these very woods, about how he always dreamed of tracking wolves in the wild. She told Shadow things she had never said out loud, and he listened. Or at least. One evening, as Evelyn gathered firewood, she heard it. A distant howl. It was faint, but unmistakable, the call of a wolf. Shadow's ears perked up instantly. His entire body stiffened, muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Evelyn's stomach clenched. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he lifted his head and howled back. The sound sent shivers down her spine. It was deep, powerful, something that didn't belong to her quiet little world. Evelyn set down the firewood, wiping her hands on her coat. "That was your pack, wasn't it?" Shadow didn't look at her. His golden eyes remained fixed on the horizon, his body perfectly still. She waited for him to run, to disappear into the trees and never look back. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he lowered his head, let out a quiet huff, and turned back toward the barn. Evelyn exhaled, feeling something tight in her chest loosen, just a little. The day started like any other. Evelyn stepped outside, stretching her arms, breathing in the crisp morning air. Shadow lay in his usual spot near the barn, eyes half closed, as if dozing. Then, gunshots. A crack, sharp and distant, split the air. Shadow's head snapped up. His ears twitched, and in an instant he was on his feet, alert. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Hunters. She grabbed her shotgun from inside the cabin, not to use, but to have, just in case. Then, without thinking, she followed Shadow into the woods. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was because she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. They moved quickly through the trees, the snow crunching beneath their feet. Evelyn's heart pounded. The sound of another shot rang out, this time closer. Then she heard voices. Could have sworn I hit something. Keep looking, it was a big one. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Poachers. Hunting wolves in these woods was illegal, but that didn't stop people. Some did it for sport. Others sold pelts. Her grip tightened on the shotgun. Shadow stopped suddenly, his body lowering to the ground, ears flat against his head. Evelyn crouched beside him, peering through the trees. Two men stood near the frozen river, rifles slung over their shoulders. A third knelt, inspecting the snow, tracking something. Shadow growled low in his throat. Evelyn placed a hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Easy," she whispered. He didn't move. The men muttered something to each other, then turned and started walking deeper into the woods, toward the denser part of the forest. Toward the pack. Evelyn's breath caught. If Shadow's pack was out there, they were in danger, and so was he. Evelyn didn't think, she acted. Stepping out from behind the trees, she called out, "Hey!" The men spun around. Their hands went straight to their rifles. She held up her shotgun, not aiming, but making sure they saw it. "You're trespassing," she said firmly. One of the men, a tall guy with a thick beard, smirked. "Didn't realize these were your woods, lady." "They're protected lands, you know that." Another man, younger, adjusted his grip on his rifle. "We're just hunting deer." "There are no deer this time of year," she shot back, "but there are wolves." The bearded man narrowed his eyes. "That a problem?" Her heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "Yeah, it is." A long pause. Then, one of them took a step forward. Shadow growled. The men froze. For the first time, they noticed him. His dark fur bristled, his golden eyes locked onto them with a silent, lethal promise. The bearded man's smirk faltered. He took a step back. "That yours?" Evelyn didn't answer. The men exchanged glances. They weren't scared of her, but they were scared of Shadow. Without another word, they turned and left. Evelyn waited until their voices faded before exhaling sharply. She turned to Shadow. "You just saved my life, didn't you?" Shadow flicked his tail and sat down as if nothing had happened. Evelyn shook her head. Figures. That night, she sat on her porch watching the moon rise. Shadow lay at her feet. She reached down hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his thick fur. He didn't move away. She smiled. "You're not just a wolf," she murmured. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching. "Your family." For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel alone, but deep down she knew the truth. This couldn't last forever. Shadow was healing, stronger every day. The wild was calling him back, and one day he would have to answer. She just wasn't sure she'd be ready when that day came. The world was changing. Spring had arrived in the mountains, painting the forest in shades of green. The last traces of snow melted into the earth, feeding the rivers that cut through the valley. The trees, once bare and lifeless, stretched toward the sun, their fresh leaves trembling in the warm breeze. Birds returned, filling the air with song. And yet, Shadow still remained. Evelyn had stopped expecting him to leave. Every morning, she opened the barn door, half expecting it to be empty. But each time, golden eyes met hers. She told herself it was temporary, that he would leave when he was ready. But part of her had begun to wonder, was he staying because he wanted to? Or was he staying because she wanted him to? Shadow's limp had nearly disappeared. His movements were strong again, fluid and graceful. He no longer stayed in the barn during the day, preferring to roam the land. Sometimes he disappeared into the woods for hours. Evelyn knew he was hunting, reconnecting with the instincts that had been dulled by his time with her. But no matter how far he wandered, he always came back. She told herself it was because she fed him, because he knew she was safe. But deep down, she knew better. One evening, as she sat on the porch with her tea, Shadow appeared from the woods. He wasn't alone. A small, scrawny figure trailed behind him, barely larger than a house cat. At first, Evelyn thought it was a fox, but then she saw the shape of its ears, the way it moved. A pup. Her breath caught. Shadow paused at the edge of the yard, glancing at her as if waiting for her reaction. The pup, dark-furred and wide-eyed, crouched behind Shadow's legs, peeking out at her. Evelyn's heart pounded. "Where did you find him?" she murmured, though of course she got no answer. She had seen enough wolves in the wild to know what this meant. Shadow had a pack somewhere, and this pup, lost, abandoned, or orphaned, had been taken in. By him, by her wolf. The realization hit her like a slow-moving wave. Shadow was a father, and now, in a way, so was she. Evelyn didn't know what to do. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to do anything. The pup was small, too young to be alone. But it wasn't helpless. Shadow kept a watchful eye on it, guiding it around the cabin, letting it sniff at the steps, the woodpile, the garden. The pup was cautious, but curious. Evelyn had the strange feeling that Shadow was showing her something. She wasn't just his human anymore. She was theirs. That night, as the pup curled up beside Shadow near the barn, Evelyn sat at the window, watching them. Something inside her shifted. She had spent years believing she was alone, and now, somehow, she wasn't. Days passed. The pup, whom Evelyn started calling Ash, grew braver. He followed her around the yard, watching as she fed the chickens, as she hung laundry on the line. Sometimes he tried to play, pouncing on her boot, tugging at the edge of her coat. She pretended to be annoyed, but the truth was she loved it. Shadow, ever watchful, observed their interactions carefully. She could see it in his eyes. He was waiting for her to understand. He wouldn't stay forever, but he wanted her to know. Ash would. It took days for Evelyn to accept it. Shadow had healed. He had stayed longer than she ever thought he would. But he had a place in the wild, a pack, a purpose. And now he had made sure she wouldn't be alone when he left. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Evelyn knew before she even opened the door. Shadow was leaving. She stepped outside, her heart heavy. He stood at the edge of the woods, his golden eyes locked onto hers. He wasn't running. He wasn't sneaking away. He was waiting. For her to say goodbye. Evelyn swallowed against the lump in her throat. She had prepared for this moment, told herself it would be fine, that it wouldn't hurt, but it did. More than she could have imagined. She walked toward him, each step feeling heavier than the last. When she reached him, she knelt down, ignoring the ache in her knees. She placed a trembling hand on his head. "You take care of yourself, all right?" Shadow blinked slowly, pressing his head against her palm. Her chest tightened. And then, before she could lose her nerve, she whispered, "Go." For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with a final nudge against her hand, he turned and slipped into the trees. Evelyn watched until he was gone. And then, for the first time in years, she let herself cry. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Ash stayed close to her, filling some of the space Shadow had left behind, but the absence was there, a missing piece. She didn't regret letting him go, but God, she missed him. Then one evening, as she sat on the porch staring at the darkened tree line, a sound broke the silence. Low, mournful, and strong. A howl. Evelyn's breath caught. She stood, heart racing. Another howl joined it, higher, fainter. Ash lifting his head, calling back. Tears welled in her eyes. Shadow hadn't forgotten her. He never would. She smiled, wiping her face. "Good night, old friend," she whispered, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She felt found.